nonsense, and when the news is announced, she literally exclaims, "Yippee!" Well, what's happened here? Are we growing money on trees and we can all just get wealthy without production? Is this the right way to sustain Grandma in her advanced stages of life? Is it better for Grandma that we leave her to this? Or is it better that we somehow get Grandma's attention, that she becomes conducive to this idea of mathematically perfected economy? Well, I speak to this generation quite often, and quite frankly, they're the most indisposed to recognize the causes or solution of our problems of all people. And we can understand that for many reasons. But the truth of the matter is, what Grandma is not paying attention to is that the reason the stock bounced up to 15 cents was that morning the Federal Reserve announced that it was going to buy another $600 billion in federal securities, Treasury securities, whatever. And so what's going on there is, as the curtain inevitably drops in the final scene of the terminal stages of this finite lifespan of an obfuscation of the currency which served no one, Grandma is actually hoping that she's treading water, that her IBM stocks are going to stay at a high that she's hoping for. Meanwhile, she really can't ever cash in on that. And all the while, what's going on is so that that stock could bounce up 15 cents based on a hollow facade, which itself is doomed to failure, and which can only require further and ever escalating efforts to rescue the lie of economy, which can only multiply artificial costliness on us into terminal failure. She's hoping to tread water, while for 15 cents of benefit she can never cash in on, we're assuming unbelievable, unfathomable sums of further artificial cost. So part of this transformation to mathematically perfected economy, what we do basically is we refinance all our monetary obligations under mathematically perfected economy, placing an original ceiling on the cost of producing the thing, on either the cost of producing the property under today's dollars, or the actual finance principal, whichever is lesser. In other words, if you originally bought this home, this $350,000 home for $150,000, we're not going to refinance it for less than $150,000. And so we actually are going to eliminate most of the artificial indebtedness that exists, owing to the fact that we've paid for it many times over. Now, the fact of the matter is, nonetheless, that we have a volume of property which is unrepresented. And so, in order to reflate the circulation to what it needs to be, that it represents the remaining value of represented wealth, we restore to the accounts of the people their losses under this obfuscation of the currency, so that, say for instance, we compelled, instead of a social security program, we compel people to save so much of their earnings, a third of their earnings or whatever, for sustaining their standard of living in later life. Well, we determine how much we need to reflate the circulation, and then we redistribute it back into the accounts of the people, so much as they might have saved, so that even with this failing social security program, everyone can immediately, without it costing us a penny, sustain themselves in retirement. Now, what's going to happen, and that's the basic prescription for the transformation. It's a reflation of the circulation to the very sum or volume that we were discussing earlier, that Benjamin Franklin needed to realize what was the proper amount. And so what's going to happen with these investments that we call them? They're not really investments. So once after an IPO, all you're doing is gambling on possession of these things. So what's going to happen to Grandma's IBM stocks? Well, under mathematically perfected economy, IBM has all options that it doesn't have otherwise, and that would be either to issue promissory obligations to buy their stock back, which allows them to reduce the costs for the products and services they provide, because they're no longer paying perpetual dividends on these stocks. So the whole idea of funding a corporation will likely go away. It doesn't mean that new ideas won't spring up, but their value will be true value in innovations in administering to the affairs of the business or whatever. And I would imagine that the math is that the value of the stocks can reach a reasonable level only under mathematically perfected economy, and more so than ever, the companies would be able and compelled to buy their stocks back and become something other than a corporation. In other words, instead of directed by a board of directors who appoints CEO and whatever, they're a different kind of a structure that more intelligently delivers upon its administrative needs to itself, and bases its decisions on a far more sounder, singular motivating factor of production and market share. So those are the basic differences. I expect there to be some changes in our concepts of doing business. I expect there to be far more viable competition to develop further methods of distributing product to market. You may see all kinds of experiments arise practically immediately. People, driving to the store, putting up a website where you can order, groceries for your town, and they go to town every day and, fill up a small refrigerator truck with, what everybody needs today. And instead of buying your cilantro a week ago, you have it delivered this afternoon. So the sky's the limit. Likewise, as you say, we, especially if we return to producing quality products, another thing that's going to happen is, we won't be consuming that product so many times over much more limited lifespans. Another thing that's likely to happen is because we're so dramatically reducing the costs of government and eliminating redundant jobs in government and on and on. What's to happen is that we're going to divide the jobs that exist equitably amongst ourselves and enjoy far more, probably twice as much at least, free time to ourselves without any drop in standard of living at all, and in fact probably more likely a far higher quality standard of living. After all, when I was in elementary school, the covers we used to put on our textbooks used to promise that by the year 1980, owing to increased industrial expansion, the greatest problem in the world would be knowing what to do with all our free time. It never happened, and the reason is artificial multiplication of falsified indebtedness.
Yeah, I think that was the scheming plan to get us all hooked and spiked again.
To the degree of which it's a plan, I don't know, and I know that one comes up a lot also.
Yeah.
People are convinced. Naomi Klein did a book that she calls it the shock doctrine. I haven't read it, but I've heard her speak, and I know that it's about, from her own mouth at least, that it's about this idea that corporations and banks, the ruling elite, have basically planned this. Well, I know that there's a great effort to persist in it, despite its obviously potentially fatal consequences. But the truth of the matter, I don't believe that it's a plan to collapse. After all, a parasite can only live off a surviving host. The parasite that kills the host is in deep trouble, especially when that's the only host there is. Now, in the case of the Great Depression, the first Great Depression, of course, we went on for some 10 years. Without restoring, artificially renewing creditworthiness so that we could start over again, and the real reason that there was a new lifespan of the system was not that the system can recover, because it can't recover. You've permanently destroy creditworthiness. What has to happen is you have to artificially allow people to start over again, even though creditworthiness is destroyed. Theoretically, the artificial monetary failure is permanent. So I don't know that the 10-year pattern would be repeated again. And if I was administering to this thing, I could see how, I could bounce it up from here and I could keep it at a much higher spot. But that isn't the right thing to do about all this, because, what all you're doing is extending all the injustice of the system. You're perpetuating the crime against us by virtue, if it is one, of minimalizing it's of settling on some middle ground of committing the crime. So